Good morning. Sorry for being a minute late. That you all were able to join. It's fun to see you guys here. And one thing that I'm excited about today is I would love for this to be a little bit of a discussion. So if you guys want, you can turn on your cameras and you can participate with me. You can almost use it as office hours because I'm seeing some really wild stuff recently. And I think it's pretty normal when we get busy to see more of this, but it always surprises me when, it comes in waves. And what I'm talking about is seller remorse. Kent, I see that you're on here. Good morning.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Good. You don't deal with a whole lot of seller remorse. You probably deal a little bit more with the buyer remorse. But the distinction I will make is even sellers are buyers. And so when they put their house in the market and they're going to get top dollar or whatever it is, they come to go to someone like Kent, who's with Fidelity Direct Mortgage, and they realize how expensive it's going to be. And then their buyer remorse evolves back into seller remorse. What have you seen from people? How are you kind of educating them about, mortgages and costs and things like that right now?
We don't really see it a lot, and it's one of the reasons that I really love the mortgage business as a whole. As you know, I was a finance guy, and I was in the stock business many years ago before I got into the mortgage business. The reason that I like the mortgage business is because there's no loser in a transaction. We don't really see that remorse part of it where there's a winner and a loser. Everybody's accomplishing what they want to get accomplished in the transaction. So I don't see it a lot. Occasionally maybe a rate moves a certain direction or something like that, but not really, not a lot.
That's great. I love hearing that. Elaine, I see that you're on the phone or on the video. Have you seen any buyer or seller remorse lately? Elaine, I'm talking to you. Are you there?
Yes.
I'm calling you out. I'm good at it. So I'm just curious if over your career, have you seen any buyer or seller remorse that you can remember?
Not recently. I haven't had any transactions recently, but I hear about it.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you. So I have a couple of stories, and if you don't mind, I'll share them because they are a little wild. Number one is builders. So I've had a couple of buyers that have put contracts on for new construction and in turn have thrown their house on the market to sell. Their house on the market sells really quickly. And really quickly is, it's a moving target. It might be 30 days or less. That to me is still quick. But the house sells really quickly. They get told by their builder that they'll be able to meet the closing date and they just don't. And so now you have a seller who is in a really bad spot and they agreed to sell. They know what they agreed to. They want to sell, but because they have nowhere to go, they will turn and they will just make that the buyer's problem. And it's really, really unfortunate because the buyer doesn't deserve it. The seller really doesn't want it, but yet we're still in that same spot. So a couple of things that I had to use recently in that exact scenario was educating the seller as to what the downside is. And in a scenario where the seller is doing it for purely selfish reasons of, well, I don't want to be homeless, I don't really give them much latitude. I do not encourage it. I snip it in the butt as quickly as possible, and I don't give them a lot of options. I say, look, here's the contract, black and white. Let's look at the seller default, buyer remedies. And I just lay it all out. If you don't close, the buyer will come for you. The buyer will immediately file lis pendens on the property, which for the uninitiated, I hope none of you even heard of that word before, but lis pendens is like a pending lawsuit. It's a placeholder, almost like if you were to rent a book at the library, you have a hold on a particular book. You haven't rented it yet, you have your hold. That's what a lis pendens is. And it tells all the world that Kent is really upset and that he is going to sue, and that property is tied up, right, Ken? So the
Absolutely,
buyer, and I warned the seller, I say, they will do that, and this is where I come in, you know, for those who have worked with me in the past. I love finding compromise. I love finding all the options and then empowering the buyer or the seller to come up with one. But in this scenario, I don't give lots of options. I lay it down hard for the seller and say, buyer, on day one, we'll file a lis pendens, and they will tie up your property, and they will follow it up with a lawsuit for specific performance and or damages, and whatever money you thought you were going to lose by not having a place to live and having to rent something short term, and what, you know, I'm going to have to get two movers, and the storage costs are outrageous, and maybe I should have held out for more. I said, whatever money you thought you were going to lose, I'm going to make that tenfold if you actually get sued. Because the very first phone call you have to have with an attorney to defend yourself is going to cost you 10 grand. Right off the bat, retainer fee, and then it's going to be $300 to $500 an hour thereafter for the next 12 months, right? So that is, I can bring it in really hard. I don't give the seller options, and that's what we did in this scenario. The seller realized very quickly that that was not something they were interested in, that they were going to just have to move out. And, you know, the buyer had some flexibility. So I was able to take that seller and then go back to the buyer and say, look, I think I've got the seller to follow through on things. We're in a really good spot, but can you do me this one favor? Can you offer X? You can give them a day. Can we just extend closing a week, whatever it might have been? And that way the seller doesn't feel backed into a corner, because any party that's backed into a corner could bite. You know, I don't want that. I don't want any wounded animals that feel threatened. And so the seller didn't deserve that. The way they went about it was totally wrong, but it made it so much better. It improved the goodwill and the relationship among the party, and all the realtors were very supportive in getting that deal across the finish line. Now, there was one benefit in that case. I was in the middle. I was the closing agent for both parties. So I didn't solely represent the buyer. I didn't solely represent the seller or the lender. I was closing agent. I was just transacting the deal. And because of that, I had a direct line of communication. I didn't have a whole lot of players that I had to deal with to get that settled out. But the deal closed. We delayed closing a couple of days, gave the seller a little bit of time to figure out where they were going to go, and we closed. Seller's out of the house, it's done, and buyer's thrilled. It's a temporary little speed bump that actually allowed the agents to look really good in hindsight. That was fun, and that's what started the last couple of weeks, because two more deals came up just like that, but with a little bit of twist. So I then got a call in the last week on a deal where the seller had other issues. They had I think they had made a bad deal and wanted to renegotiate. And the insurance was coming in, insurance was going to pay to replace the roof. And the buyer was going out and realizing they didn't have any really good options. They needed to sell, but they also couldn't afford to leave. And the seller just said, unless you give me another $50,000, I'm not moving. You're getting a new roof, I need more money. And it was kind of the same thing of like, wait, what? The problem was that this seller was a little more challenging. She just refused to listen or even talk. You couldn't even talk to her. You couldn't get her on the phone. You couldn't meet with her. It was like she just kind of blocked everybody. And that was different. That required me having a very frank conversation with the buyer. And my conversation with the buyer kind of went like this. I said, I don't like this for you. This is really, really bad. This is not just a seller who's having a little bit of remorse. This is a seller whose life is falling apart. And they are already the wounded dog, and they're already biting us. And in my guess, it wasn't salvageable. And that the buyer needed to immediately start thinking of alternatives. And I told him another thing that I kind of hinted to is, it's like, buyer, I'm so sorry. This is not your fault, but this is your problem. And you know what we ended up doing in that one is I suggested to the buyer to sweeten the pot. The seller had no right to ask for a $50,000 increase or credit or any of those things, but I said that actually would get the deal done. You know, and I don't think 50 grand makes sense, but what I told him to do was offer 10. And it depends on the purchase price. Let's say it's a $500,000 deal. You offer the seller an additional $10,000 if they close. You move the closing date up, $10,000. You can use that to figure out where you're going. It'll help you with security deposits. It'll do all these things. Give them 10 grand, or you will allow the seller to terminate the deal. You will release your rights to sue them if she gives you $10,000. It was like, you can either take 10,000 or you can give 10,000. And what I really love about that is that you're not backing an injured animal into the corner more and more. You're giving them options. You're saying you can have this bowl of kibble or this bowl of kibble. Which one do you want? And it was received very well. The seller's entire demeanor changed. Now, you're probably noticing on both of those deals, I really didn't rely much on the contract itself. Because when you have a client who's basically lost, they don't care about the contract, so why should we? So maybe I'll use it to remind them, but it can.
I was just gonna say, they must be cash deals. Because that's gonna affect loan to value.
I think one of them was not, but yeah, it could affect loan to value. There are ways around it. It could, you know, you might need an updated appraisal, but in this case, it wasn't going to cause a problem. And honestly, you know, if a bag of money, you know, fell from the sky, I wouldn't know where it was coming, right?
Yeah, appraisal issue, loan to value issue, but yeah, if it's that small, it's only 10 grand, there's a workaround for sure.
Yeah. By the way, someone said, I recall seeing a lot of this during COVID when buyers were purchasing via Zoom walkthrough. Yeah, you're totally right about that. This is like a different version of it, but it is a big problem where sellers would, during COVID, sellers would sell at this price that was absolutely outrageous, but then be shocked by the price of the new purchase. And they're like, my agent didn't tell me. Like, I'm sure they did. You know, that's not a good excuse. I did have another scenario. This one was a little bit different. We had a seller whose wife got very ill between the time that they went under contract and the time that the closing was going to happen. Got a new diagnosis, and it just threw their life upside down. And in this scenario, I only represented the seller, and we had a very honest conversation about what to do. And I gave him every option. I didn't feel like he was doing this vindictively or like in retrospect and rethinking the deal. It wasn't any of that. It was that his life was about to fall apart and he was scared. And the one thing he wanted was to not have to move. That would have saved him. And so I said, okay, here's what your options are. If you refuse to close, the buyer will sue you, the buyer will get a judgment, and the buyer will win. But that might take 12 months. It'll cost you 50 grand in attorney's fees. But in the meantime, yeah, you can live in that house. Now you'll lose money. You will absolutely lose money. And you will absolutely lose. But I can buy you 12 months if that's what you really want. And if you're willing to take the downside. However, and this is where I gave him the other solution, says, I don't want you to do that to the buyer. I think that it puts the buyer in a really bad spot. I know you don't want to do that to the buyer either, so let me give you another solution. The other solution was take the money and go stay at the Ritz. Sounds crazy, but this guy was getting $100,000 over asking. And he was upset because the other house was going to be more expensive and he just wanted more time. He wanted to think about it. So take the 100 grand and go to the Ritz. Go stay at a hotel for a month or two, go on a trip, buy, buy something fun for your family that you can do together. Take the money, stay away from the lawsuit. And in 6 months or 12 months, when your life settles down a little bit more, you can buy something then. And that's exactly what he did. He actually hired a white glove mover where him and his wife did not have to raise a finger. They moved the entire house out. They moved the closing date up a little bit, and the buyer paid extra for that. So the seller ended up being like, all right, what I thought was my only option actually had another option that we like even better. I'm able to spoil my kids and my wife, on a really cool trip and things like that. So I tried to listen in that scenario. That one was kind of heartbreaking, but at the end of the day, I did feel like it was my obligation to get that deal closed. That I can't, and this is one of my big pieces that I want to impart on you today, which is you have to try to keep your clients following the terms of the contract. And there's so many scenarios where I can bring up that same issue, but you cannot, if possible, you should not allow your client to run roughshod on the property, on the contract and closing, because it has so many ill effects and can kill your reputation. I'll give you a good example. Yesterday, I was dealing with an attorney, and we have a setback violation on a survey. And, I could have been just difficult, like, hey, get this fixed. And it would have cost the seller $1,000 in variance fees, a couple $1,000s in attorney's fees. And it would have been just like, what a pain. But so instead of doing that, I talked to my client and I said, here's how this works. We can request this objection to the survey. We can require that the seller fix it. Alternatively, we can just ask for a simple credit, and then you can use that money to get a variance sometime in the future, or you can use it to buy a couch, whatever you want to do. And we can kind of save them the headache and the consternation. Originally the buyer was like, it needs to be perfect. It needs to be perfect. And I said, look, it really doesn't. In this scenario, there's no really big risk here. It's not something that is going to haunt your client forever. And then we got the client on the phone and we allowed the client to, actually, I think I've misstated the story, but I was talking to the agent first and then we talked to the client. But collectively, we tried to keep the client in the lane. We didn't let them veer off of it too poorly. That one was crazy. Oh, we have more stories like that, which are just wild, but I'm curious if anyone is seeing this in the market, because it bothers me when it comes up. And people will sabotage deals and if the newer agents, I think they're more at risk of this than any, of where you're not keeping a close control over the client, in the sense of like, hey, this is going off the rails, I need to try and pull you back. And then reaching out to the other agent saying, hey, I'm so sorry, my client's being a stickler, my client's doing this. How can we work this out to find a solution? I actually did that this morning. Michelle, I see that you're on this morning, and I'm curious, you and I have had a lot of deals in the past, in the present. And I know you've seen this a lot, where you kind of have to massage your client. You have to kind of keep them in the lane. Do you have anything recently that you're working on like that, or anything you tell people about?
I really try to prevent these situations from coming up by when you're working with a buyer and they're buying a place. I always talk to them about the exit strategy, because eventually you're going to exit, and whether it's a planned or unplanned exit, you have to think about that at all times. And when you're listing the house, you always have the conversation, what's the plan? Where are you going? And if they're going to new construction, I highly recommend they review that contract and understand there's really no end date on those contracts. With most of them. And I recommend go over it with your attorney and then we'll list accordingly, because my understanding is there is no end date. They have so many caveats in them that they say 9 months, but since the pandemic, I have not seen 9 months.
No, and the real scary part is that the builder will tell you whatever you want to hear. And Michelle, I know you're building a house, you're probably having that same problem where the architect will tell you what you want to hear, the builder will tell you what you want to hear, and then all of a sudden there's a new reality 6 months later.
I have hard contracts with drop dead dates. A lot of buildings do this when they can only allow people to work from May to October. And any day that you're not completed the job, we offer a bonus if you complete on time. And then we also offer a deduction if you don't.
Yeah.
You just have to put things in stone nowadays. And I have incentives too. You know, I think people work well with incentives, and as long as we pass inspection and we move forward, we're actually having one of those conversations with one of the people we've hired to do the job, because they're just not showing up.
Yeah.
And
it's a lot.
It is. I don't wish it upon most.
Well, and I had a call this morning from a buyer, and she was really struggling with the builder contract. And I didn't mean to go too far into the builder side of this, but Michelle, your computer is kind of giving us a hard time. But the problem with the contract is that the builder has all the leverage, and the buyer saying, well, that's not fair. That's not fair. What about this? What about that? And I said, unfortunately, you can ask, but you can't require. And so we had that scenario where the builder was delaying, telling you one thing, but the contract allowed him to extend unilaterally for 2 years. On another deal I have currently, they're trying to line up 1031. So 1031 is when you sell a rental property and buy another one, you can defer the taxable gain until, later on down the road. It's a great solution, but you almost always, you have to sell before you buy, and you have to do it within 6 months. Well, when you have new construction, the builder can tell you that, yes, we'll be closed within 6 months. We can even put a close date of within 6 months, but we can't guarantee a closing. We can have it be where the seller doesn't have the ability to extend, that the buyer can terminate. But I had to tell the buyer, I said, I cannot protect your 1031 exchange. If the builder's not done, it's not done. There's nothing guaranteed. And to Michelle's point, she said, well, we can motivate the seller to get done faster, and we can deduct or give them some sort of per diem if they don't finish on time. But at the end of the day, if they don't finish, they don't finish. There's only so much that builders can do. They're not necessarily doing it on purpose. It's just the reality of new construction.
I've seen rain hold up deals for
Sure.
a month or two.
Yeah, especially South Florida rain, that's for sure. So who can kind of speak to that? Has anyone else seen something like that where buyers and sellers are giving them a hard time? I'm trying to get you guys to participate because it will help me on these on today's class. I would love that. No, come on, somebody wants something. Well, maybe this will be a shorter class today, but so I'm trying to think some of the other issues that we're dealing with. Big things. I have on my desk a couple of new items. I am still seeing a lot of fraud, a ton of fraud. And you're going to see an article written by my office in the next couple of weeks about realtors being sued, and it's on the uptick. And the main reasons, I think there were 3 main reasons. One is theft of personal data, which means that you were hacked, and your client's information got disseminated, and maybe fake wiring instructions got sent out, and might even cost them some money. Realtors are getting sued left and right for that. And we even talked about it. I'm on the NABOR Forms Committee, the Legal Forms Committee. And it came up at the last week's meeting where every attorney in the room had the same mindset, which is you have to treat your business like a business. We have to start moving away from using personal email accounts to do big transactions or even little transactions. I had this discussion recently with a realtor who was really freaked out. He was selling his own house and was scared about wiring instructions. And I said, you know, in all fairness, you kind of have, you know, what is your email? And it was like an AOL account. I said, you're using an AOL account for your $1 million business, you know, doing millions of dollars in transactions a year, and you're using a personal email. I think that is really good information to keep the deals together, the ones that deserve to be together, so we have to be more secure. We have to have better passwords. We have to look more legitimate. You know, appearances are everything. Behind the scenes, you can easily set up what they call dual authentication, which is where you get the text message code before you can sign in on a new device. I would say every week this year, I've gotten news that one of my clients or one of my agents or the inspector or the insurance company has been impersonated. Now, it doesn't mean that they were necessarily hacked, but the indication is that they were. The perception is that they were. So every time every week we have to do a full audit on our system and see if anyone has been compromised. And luckily, knock on wood, we've been good. We haven't had any compromise, but I've seen realtors get compromised, buyers get compromised, sellers get compromised, insurance agents and inspectors all get compromised just this year with my closings. And it is so scary. So before you have a close one, I really would recommend, in the very least, you set up dual authentication on your email. You can continue to use Gmail, you can continue to use AOL, just set up that extra security feature and it will go a long, long way. That is like the #1 reason realtors are getting sued right now. And you're easy targets, so easy. So be careful. The other reason that realtors are getting sued is fake sellers, impersonated sellers. So they find vacant land and they'll reach out to you and say, you know, Kent, I've seen that you are really, you know, I love your online presence. Love your online presence. Well, Kent's like, well, I don't have an online presence. What are you talking about? But they will brown nose you. They'll be like, wow, you are great. And I would love for you to list my property down on Marco or in Bonita or wherever it is. And you take a look at it, the names match. He sends you or she sends you an ID and you're like, well, it seems fair to me. What do you want to market it at? And they'll give you something that's very reasonable and you'll run with it. 99 out of 100 times, and I'm not joking on that, 99 out of 100 times, it is a complete fraud. Complete fraud. And so my trick that I've developed, there are a couple of things that the industry has developed, but the thing that I love the most is ask for a copy of the closing documents from when they purchased it. It's a really good solution. And they should send you the letter from the attorney's office that comes with the deed and the title policy, as well as the closing statement. Now, of those things, the warranty deed is recorded. That's super easy to get.
Warranty deed, I was going to say, right?
Yeah, but Ken's, you know, what's not easy to get is the closing statement. The other thing that's a little challenging to get is the title policy. And you know what's really hard to get is the letter that came with the attorney. So if you had a letter from my office saying, thank you, Mr. Jones, for closing with us. We were honored and privileged to be working with you. Please see attached warranty deed, title policy, and closing statement for your records. If I had a seller who reached out to me, that's awesome. I don't even care about any of the other stuff. Like, I feel really good about the transaction at that point. Now, other things that we do that we recommend from industry is you send a letter to the seller on the tax records. Let me show you how that works. Screen 2. All right, so we go on, let's say it's Collier. I know this website the best. and we'll just look for me. So on here, it has the property address up top, 1860 Olds Court. But down here, you're going to have the forwarding address. This is your mailing address. And so in this scenario, it's obvious. I live at the address. It's this, the mailing address matches the property address. So this is, I'm not a very good candidate for fraud in this scenario because it's hard for someone to sell the house when I'm actually living there. That's a good piece of information, but let's say it had a different address. This was my North Carolina address or my New Jersey address. What we recommend is that you send a letter to the person listed at that address. So, dear Mr. or Mrs. Ross, thank you for reaching out to me to list your property. I'm really honored and I'm excited. We're going to be putting in the MLS this week. Please, I look forward to working with you on this one. Something so simple like that. Well, if Mr. or Mrs. Ross were not actually selling and they get that letter in their New Jersey home, they're going to freak out and give you a call. It works. Because as much as I could be impersonated and someone could even get a driver's license with my name and their picture, as easy as that is for some people, they're not going to be intercepting my mail as well. That's going to be a little harder for them to do. So this is a trick that the industry has developed that they really, really like. Another option I like is actually something on Zillow. So I don't know if I think I'm logged in on Zillow, but let's say I log in. Nope, I'm not logged in. Let's do the same thing. So you find your house and you go to owner tools and you can basically take ownership of the house. If it's not a house, you can take ownership of the land or whatever it may be. And I don't know exactly where you do that. I think it might be claim ownership, this button right here. So you have to sign in to be able to do it. You created a login. I would do this on Zillow. I would do it on Redfin. I would do it on realtor.com. And I would create that. I would own the property because that is a very easy way for fraudsters to take ownership of your property and make it look legitimate. So if you take that away from them, all of a sudden it's a lot harder. So I hope that makes sense. It's that process. And then actually the other thing that we're doing that we've actually had some success with, you saw it when I logged in originally. This is certified.com. Certified is a service that I partner with to disseminate wiring instructions. Well, one of the side benefits, if you've ever applied to a credit card and they ask you all those questions, did you ever live on the street? Did you ever, live in this, work in this county or any of these businesses? Certified does the same thing.
Do it all the time because we have to look at credit all the time. So we deal with this a lot. Exactly.
So this service is cool because whenever I'm sending wire instructions to someone or requesting wire instructions from a seller, if we send them through this service and they fail the authentication questions, it's a huge red flag. Huge red flag. So, we are very, very on top of this issue, but we're not perfect. And we require that you guys kind of do your part collectively. But if you get that call or that email saying that they're really impressed with your online presence, be careful. Be very careful because we are seeing this pop up left and right. Now, I did see another question Yvette asked, the extra step you should take. I'm trying to think what I was talking about at that point, but Yvette, call me later. We'll go over it again. But yeah, I think it's if you get a seller.
I think she was talking about not the warranty deed, but the closing statement and stuff.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah, so Yvette, if a seller were to ask you to list their property, you just simply say, for our purposes, we require that you have on record a copy of the title policy, settlement statement, and original email from, when you got the documents, when you bought the property originally. Yes, Lori, thank you. So the other option was to set up two-factor authentication on your email. Let me show you how that works. We'll go back to this here. So let's say you have an AOL account. And it's email. So AOL Mail is free and helps keep you safe. So from security to personalization, AOL Mail helps manage your digital life. So this here, AOL uses the latest in security and spam blocking technology. The key is that you use it. So if you set up an account with AOL, if you set up an account with Yahoo, or in my case, I have a Gmail account. Gmail dual factor authentication. Let's see what they have. This is the how-tos. So with two-step authentication, also called two-factor authentication, you can add an extra layer of security to your account in case your password is stolen. After you set up two-step verification, you can sign into your account with your password and your phone. Here's what it does. I have on my phone my email. I don't have to sign in every day. But if I were to sign in from my work computer for the first time, or if I go to a library and I sign in, or I go to my aunt and uncle's house and I need to use their computer to look at my emails, I'm going to have to not only know my password, but I'm also going to have to get the code that gets emailed to my account. I do the same thing with my website. So when I log into my website, if you have my password, if Kent has my password, you could get past the first stage of defense. But at that point, it would ask you to give the code that was just texted to my phone. And so even if you had my password, you still couldn't access my account. I would turn that on for everything you would have. I'd turn it on for Amazon. I'd turn it on for email, bank, really anything that you have access to. You should be able to ask. You should ask if there's two-step verification available, and then you just have to turn it on. This is step one, in my opinion. Step two is having a good password. That's how important the two-step really is. Step three would be to have maybe a business email account. I think that has dual benefits because one, it has better security options, and two, it helps you with your money. All right, guys, that's it. I'm going to try and keep getting you guys to participate as hard as it is. But thank you for joining every week. I really appreciate it. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me directly, Christian@rosstitle.com. And looking forward to hopefully seeing you guys more this year. Ken, thank you, everybody. Thank you.